The Texas flash flood disaster reveals the wrath of supercharged storms and the limits of warnings when weather defies history. Higher tariffs for Japan and South Korea unnerve the markets, even though there is a possible off-ramp for them and other nervous trading partners. The Trump economic bill is now law, so what is the bottom line for taxes on tips and Social Security? We will help you find out. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. First came the wall of water, then the wall of tears. Texas will weep all this week as the death toll, currently 95, inevitably rises. As you must know by now, flash floods on the Guadalupe River crashed in heedless torrent through the gorgeous, craggy, and isolated Texas Hill Country over the holiday weekend. 13 people remain missing. Officially, water rose more than 27 feet. Eyewitnesses described water as high as 35 feet, elevated and accelerated by 10 inches of rain that fell in just 3 hours and roared mercilessly down what Texans know as Flash Flood Alley. The National Weather Service, by all accounts, had enough staff. Flood watches and warnings were issued. But these advisories are somewhat common in that part of Texas, diluting possibly a sense of urgency. It is also unclear who heard what when. The rains, fueled by remnants of a tropical storm and unusually moist atmospheric conditions, fell overnight, slumbering campers unaware of the approaching terror. Also dreadful and soul-crushing. And yet, more than 850 people, let me repeat, more than 850 people were rescued from this maelstrom, and we hope for more rescues. Helicopters, trucks, SUVs, people on foot, rescue dogs, more than 1,000 rescuers, all sprang into coordinated action and continue to work to search for any sign of life. For these rescue efforts, at least, we can all shed a tear of thanks. For more on the aftermath and the very hard week ahead, I turn now to Nydia Cavazos, who comes to us from Kerrville, Texas. Nydia, catch us up on what we learned today.
Major, at this time, we know that the search and efforts here continue. We've seen them and we've heard them all day long. Every hour, we continue to hear the helicopters as they're surveying this land. They're searching, as you said, for any potential sign of life here. We now know that the death toll has risen in Texas to 95, and this includes the 27 campers, which are young girls, and there were young girls and their counselors as well. And so it is a tragic moment, a tragic time for Texas, as these summer camps are very much part of the long-standing traditions for the state of Texas. Now, we know that these searches are going to continue. It's multiple agencies that are involved, federal, state, and local, close to 19. And officials this morning did tell us that they're also asking for volunteers to come out and help, but they want to streamline these efforts and do it through the Salvation Army, because they have run into issues during the weekend where many people came out here trying to support, but they were getting in the way of these agencies that were conducting the searches. And so this is their plea. They're asking for help, but to do it through their recommended venues here.
Nydia, help my audience understand. It's a beautiful part of Texas, the Texas Hill Country. People go there because of its beauty, but it's also isolated. They know it's isolated, and if you camp alongside the river, it's hard to, A, get cell service in every respect, even when there's clear weather. And if you have to make a quick movement, it's hard to get away from the riverbank easily or quickly. Those are, it seems to me, contributing factors to this terrible, terrible situation.
And that's exactly right, because this is the Hill Country, and this is essentially what it's known for. It's the heart of Texas. This is where you come during the summer or spring break to get away from everything. You have limited cell service out here. You're along the river. All these cabins are typically rented out. These are Airbnbs as well. This is the summer spot. And these summer camps are also part of the tradition where I even, in fact, grew up with these summer camps and attended several of them for various summers. And this is known to us as Texas as the place where we come to relax and get away. So yes, we're also, as Texans, used to receiving these flash flood warnings and alerts. And in fact, some of the survivors that we've been speaking to from this area said when they had seen these alerts, they thought they could have never imagined what was to come. It was just yet another warning, and some of them, frankly, didn't even realize what was happening until the following day.
Nydia Cavazos from Kerrville, please give our very best to those working on rescue and those other volunteers supporting those trying to adjust to and compensate for all of the very many parts of this ongoing disaster. Nydia Cavazos, thank you so very much. The legislative director of the National Weather Service Employees Organization, Tom Fahey, joins me now here at the table. Tom, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
As I mentioned in my open, by all accounts, and I've read lots of different accounts about this, the National Weather Service in the relevant parts of Texas were staffed sufficiently and went through the proper protocols.
Exactly.
Walk my audience through the staffing and the protocols.
It was an all-hands-on-deck situation in both weather forecast offices. That means what a WFO is. We have an office in San Angelo, which is near Carr County, and then we also have the office in San Antonio, Austin, several miles away. Those are the two main hubs where we're coordinating the alerts and warnings for this particular situation.
Tom, that's in that sector at this particular moment of peril, but broadly, nationally. How is the National Weather Service staffed?
We have critical shortages across the country in multiple offices everywhere. If we were to have this situation, this dire, incredible situation that happened in Texas last weekend, happen in any one of a dozen cities in the United States, I would shudder to think of the consequences, because those offices are not as well prepared as San Angelo and San Antonio.
And when they're not as well prepared, what kind of things slip through the cracks?
Well, we have people who alerts don't get out. We have people who if you have an office that's short-staffed with 6 meteorologists, for example, it takes you normally 13 meteorologists to run a weather forecast office. But there are some offices that have 6 and 7. 6 and 7 meteorologists right now in the United States. An office with 61.5% vacancy rate for a meteorologist. That's extremely high. And we have several offices like that.
I have read, Tom, that there are some old school methodologies, radios and radio frequencies through NOAA that might have been of assistance in this matter. Also, I have also seen reports that cell towers, and I'm not a scientist and you're not a scientist, so I'm just going off of what I've read and possible inferences that can be fairly drawn. When there is a massive rain event, cell towers may not function at maximum operational efficiency. Walk my audience through those two potential factors as we think about this catastrophe.
It's possible. There is a situation called radar attenuation in meteorology. They have radars that are blacked out by a massive rain event. So if there's a massive rain event, this was quite clearly a massive rain event. A massive precipitation event. Quite clearly, the radar could have been blacked out. But also in other situations, other electronic devices also could be blacked out as a result of this massive rain influx.
And what about these NOAA, National Oceanographic Administration radios?
NOAA Weather Radio?
Yeah.
The NOAA Weather Radio is a system that's been around for 50 years. It was created in the administration of Gerald Ford. We then went forward from Gerald Ford to now. Al Gore, there was an incident in Alabama in 1995, I believe, 1994, 1995, and Al Gore said, I want these in 97% of the country, and they are. They disseminated the information. They went from a couple of hundred transmitters to well over 1,000 transmitters today in the United States. And
so you have the transmitters. Do we have enough people or the right people with the receivers?
Well, again, the receivers that's an option of the public and the local and state county emergency management officials and public safety to have a no-weather radio. So it's the responsibility of the public at that particular point. That's the last mile of emergency communication, because the federal government has provided the infrastructure to get out the emergency alerts and warnings, all the way from an emergency alert from the President of the United States in the event of a national disaster, or in a local emergency alert like this, which is weather related.
Tom Fahey, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you coming in very much.
You're very kind. Thank you, sir, for the invitation.
Thank you. At the White House, President Trump notified Japan and South Korea, allies and high-volume trading partners both, they would face 25% tariffs on all exports to the United States starting August 1st. They were among 14 nations that were notified of tariffs today. The markets, mostly two of the indices down, one up, fell about 1%, uneasily assessing, the markets that is, what may come next. Joining me from the North Lawn of the White House, Ed O'Keefe. Ed?
Major, the deadline's been pushed back yet again. The goalposts have been moved. The president now says that trade deadlines are coming August 1st, which gives his negotiators about 4 weeks to go in their ongoing trade talks. And today he sent these letters, as you mentioned, to the leaders of Japan, South Korea, and a dozen other countries, essentially telling them in part, you're getting a 25 to 40% tariff, depends on the country. And as you're aware, there will be no tariff if companies from your country decide to build or manufacture product within the United States, and in fact will do everything possible to get approvals quickly, professionally, and routinely. In other words, in a matter of weeks. And if for any reason you decide to raise your tariffs, the president tells the leaders of these countries, well, then whatever the number you choose to raise by them will be added onto the 25% or 35% or 40% we charge. Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Myanmar, Laos, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Tunisia, South Africa, among the countries that got letters today. We expect more in the coming days.
And just to remind our audience, July 9th was the other date, and that's now been moved to August 1st. Does this indicate the deadlines will keep moving, or does this feel to you, based on your experience talking with those closest to this, Ed, that we are now getting close to a culmination of this conversation?
I think it's more the latter than the former, that the deadline's going to keep moving, as it has already a few times. Look, traditionally, trade negotiations with big trading partners like Japan or South Korea, India, Vietnam, the UK, and others take months, if not years, to finalize. They won't get done in 90 days, as he had vowed. That's just not possible, and it's not something that these countries allow for. For example, these were sent in the dead of night to mostly Asian countries. Do these leaders see these as the final offer, or do they see them as subject to negotiation? The White House hasn't signaled. So it's going to be several days, if not weeks, before they respond to this, and that may force them to have to move the deadline again.
The tariff saga and the story continues. Ed O'Keefe, we appreciate it very much. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are meeting tonight amid ongoing discussions of a potential ceasefire in Gaza. So, what hangs in the balance? Dan Senor, former top foreign policy advisor to Mitt Romney, joins me here in the Conversation Corner as I amble over across the studio. My trusty set of stagehands move the big touchscreen. Dan, always a pleasure to see you. For my
Good to be with you, Major.
For my audience, lay out the top 1, 2, or 3 things to keep an eye on for this meeting between Netanyahu and President Trump.
One, what kind of progress is made on a hostage and ceasefire deal? There are negotiations happening right now in Doha. Steve Witkoff has indicated that at the end of this week, he'll be heading over there. I think they are pretty close to a deal that would allow for a 60-day ceasefire and the return of approximately 10 living Israeli hostages and around 18 of dead hostages, deceased, killed hostages, their bodies. Obviously, release of some Palestinian prisoners from Israeli prisons, as we've seen in the past. But the real question is this a path to the end of the war in the course of that 60 days? Is Israel going to actually leave Gaza or maintain some security presence there? And who will ultimately be responsible for administering civilian affairs in Gaza? And will Hamas somehow stay in the mix? Those are the sticking points that, if they can resolve those, I think you'll see a deal. So that's one thing to look for. The second thing to look for is whether or not there is any signal about the expansion of the Abraham Accords. The region is being transformed. Israel's geopolitical position in the Middle East, after what Israel just did and the U.S. just did in Iran, Israel's position is stronger than I think it's ever been, going back all the way to the Six-Day War in 1967. So could you see other Arab countries now joining the Abraham Accords, normalizing relations with Israel? I think we may see signs of that with Syria or possibly other countries. And then finally, Iran. Israel is seeking the option to take further military action against Iran if Israel and the U.S. deem that Iran is still trying to revive its nuclear program. And so I think ceasefire deal for 60 days, possible expansion of the Abraham Accords, and Israel having the flexibility to go back in Iran. Those are the three issues to look at over the next few days.
And Dan, from your perspective, where does humanitarian assistance to the non-Hamas combatants, the civilians in Gaza, stand?
Look, Israel wants to provide, and Israel's made clear that it wants to provide more humanitarian assistance into Gaza. Obviously, there's the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's operating inside Gaza.
Mixed results, though, for sure.
Can Israel do it? And can Israel create this corridor for it to be done where Hamas doesn't take over? This gets to the nub of the issue about whether or not Hamas remains in power in some way or maintains some kind of presence. Israel's arguing that it can create a humanitarian corridor, but to do that, A, Israel needs to be there to some degree. It has to have some presence to do that. And B, Hamas has to be gone. And unless those two conditions are met, it's very hard for these humanitarian, projects and programs to be unleashed in full throttle in Gaza without there being a lot of violence and with Hamas not taking a lot of the humanitarian supplies and using it for their own effect.
Dan, it probably to you strains credulity. It certainly does to me that Hamas would negotiate its way out of existence.
It's bizarre. It's a zero-sum game, and that's what honestly, Major, this is what makes these negotiations so challenging, right? Because it is a zero-sum game. Israel wants the war to end. They want their hostages back, and they want Hamas gone. Hamas wants to somehow have this war end and remain in power. Now, normally in negotiations between two parties in any kind of a geopolitical setting, you can imagine like a middle ground, some sort of accommodation where both sides can claim a win. There's no way both sides can claim a win here. Either Hamas is in power or has a presence in Gaza or not. And I think Israel is willing to make major concessions in Gaza right now, especially after the win it has had in Iran. It's reshaping the region. So I think it has a real inflection point here to make concessions. But the one concession this Israeli government will not make, I believe, is letting Hamas remain in power. And so the real question is, can each side fool the other and let the other believe that they're getting really what they want, when in reality, it's a non-starter for the other party?
Wouldn't be the first time that was attempted in the Middle East. Dan Senor, I appreciate the time very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Major.
Still to come, the president loves his signature red tie. Add to that Trump's sneakers, hats, and fragrances, and it is clear Trump is influencing style and retail trends. We explore. The boring truth. Conspiracy theorists once promised a Jeffrey Epstein bombshell. Now some of them are in government and report, well, not much news. Does Trump's new economic law wipe away taxes on Social Security and tips? The fine print, there's always fine print, may surprise and disappoint you. Next on The Takeout. Welcome back. We spent a lot of time, discussing the Trump economic bill as it wound its way through Congress. Well, now it is law, and it will, in ways large and small, change your world. So every night this week, we are going to take a long look at parts of this new law. We might even come with a catchy name and might even build a fancy graphic to go with it. Stay tuned for that possibly earth-shattering set of events. But before that, we start tonight with some of the tax changes. Last week, the Social Security Administration said the new law eliminates federal income taxes on most retirees' benefits. President Trump has also said it gets rid of taxes on tips. Well, that is not exactly the case. For more, I want to turn to CBS Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, explain how this new law does or does not eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits.
So it doesn't technically eliminate those taxes. You're not going to see a bonus check or another lump sum in your Social Security check that you get each month. What it does is allow up to a $6,000 tax deduction from your federal income taxes. So there's a couple stipulations, though. You have to be 65 years or older, and you have to make $75,000 or less to reap the full benefits of that $6,000 deduction. $150,000 if you are filing jointly and you're married. So certainly you are going to see a benefit. It's going to make things better. You're going to have more money in your pocket at the end of the year if you do, sort of fall within those areas. But I think it's really important that you're not actually removing the tax on that check that you're receiving every month. It's an important nuance in how that bill handles this.
So you're probably going to have to consult either an accountant or financial advisor for absolute clarity on your particular situation. How about taxes on tips? Sounds like there's some fine print to consider and reconcile ourselves to there as well.
Well, lucky for you, Major, I always like to read the fine print before I come
You do.
on your show.
That's why I turn to you almost every night on this program.
So yes, very similarly, there are stipulations. If I go and make $100,000 in tips, it's not going to be like I'm getting no tax on that. So for tax on tips, it's up to $25,000 where you aren't going to receive tax. You're going to be able to deduct that. For overtime pay, it's $12,500. The really important part, though, is this is just federal income tax. You're still going to have to pay out the benefits to Social Security and Medicare. When you look at your check and you see all of that money coming out, this just has to deal with the federal income tax. And I will highlight there's already about a third of folks that do reap a portion of their income from tips that don't make enough money to qualify for federal income tax. So this is really going to benefit sort of those middle of the road folks who are seeing a portion of their income from tips, but also have another job on the side.
Very quickly, Kelly, talk to us about ways in which this law kind of breaks with Republican tradition when it comes to taxation and questions therein.
Two areas. One, there are a number of carve-outs for very specific niche things. That's something that we have seen GOP lawmakers lament about in the past when it's been Democratic spending bills. And then the other big one is just how much that this is projected to add to the budget deficit. I mean, certainly you look back over the last few presidencies, Democratic or Republican, they have added to the budget deficit, but oftentimes we hear from Republican lawmakers that's something that they don't want to do. This is projected to add nearly $4 trillion.
If the economic growth is booming, maybe not so much, but if it isn't, there will be a deficit issue for all of us to confront. Kelly O'Grady, I appreciate it as always. Thanks so very much.
Third parties have never worked, so he can have fun with it, but I think it's ridiculous.
You just heard the word. That's President Trump dismissing Elon Musk's supposed new political party. The word ridiculous. More on where that's headed next here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Here is a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. Federal authorities today shot and killed a 27-year-old assailant who opened fire on a Border Patrol facility in McAllen, Texas. The gunman, armed with an assault rifle, began shooting just before 6 a.m. One officer was injured in the exchange of gunfire. No motive is known. There was another shooting outside a Texas immigration detention center on Friday. A federal judge ruled today that Kilmar Abrego Garcia's lawsuit in his case alleging wrongful deportation to El Salvador can proceed. The ruling came today during a court hearing in Maryland at which the federal judge found several Trump administration arguments, quote, meritless, unquote. Garcia's lawyers also advocated for him to be moved to Maryland, where he had been living. Garcia awaits trial in Tennessee on federal human smuggling charges. That request to move him to Maryland has not been adjudicated. The Trump Justice Department has said it would arrest and deport Garcia if freed to await trial. The Trump administration is revoking the legal status of more than 70,000 immigrants from Honduras and Nicaragua. It's the latest effort to curtail humanitarian programs that allowed foreigners to stay in the United States temporarily. Roughly 72,000 Hondurans and 4,000 Nicaraguans, many of whom arrived in the 1990s, were granted protections due to an environmental disaster. The Justice Department poured cold water on a conspiracy theory some of its highest-ranking officials helped to promote. The department now says disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein did in fact die by suicide and never had a so-called client list with lots of damaging and politically important names on it. FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, before they joined the Bureau, alleged cover-ups and corruption in the incarceration death of Epstein, a convicted sex trafficker. Today's announcement came after promises of big, blockbustery disclosures. Joining me now, White House correspondent for Semaphore, Shelby Talcott, congressional reporter for Notice, that's News of the U.S., Daniela Diaz, and our Department of Justice reporter, Jake Rosen. It's great to have you here at the family table. Thanks so much. Happy Monday. Jake, walk our audience through what was now released, or what has been released by the Trump Justice Department, and how much it differs from the exaggerated, overheated claims made before those who now release it were in positions of authority.
Well, we've heard these claims for years, going back before President Trump's even first term, about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, the connections between President Trump and other high-profile politicians, including the Clintons and a number of other people, and Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operations that he ran. What the Department of Justice put out today and sent to reporters and posted online was a two-page memo in which they said that, according to their investigation, that all evidence shows that Epstein did, in fact, likely commit suicide in that cell, and they released 10-plus hours of video footage in which you can scrub through it. Nobody enters that cell in the day and hours in which it is alleged that he died. In addition to that, they also said that no further documents would be coming out about this case, effectively ending the public disclosures that the Trump administration has been doing with everything from JFK, RFK, MLK, and these Epstein files. In addition to that, they said there is a systematic review, said there was no so-called client list, which has been at the center of all of these, in which they've said that there is some kind of list, which even Elon Musk said a couple of weeks ago, including high-profile names, which featured Donald Trump, in addition to a number of other people, part of this so-called cabal, right, of people who were part of this liberal elite that were, or conservative elite in this case, potentially, that were working to somehow cover up their own tracks in terms of sex.
Quickly, how has this been digested by the MAGA ecosphere?
Well, in February, Attorney General Pam Bondi had some people at the White House, top Trump acolytes online. They all walked out of the Oval Office after meeting with Bondi, held up binders that said the Epstein Files Part 1. All of that stuff, it turned out, was already publicly in the sphere. One of those people, who goes by D.C. Drano, called it shameful that there was a cover-up. We saw Congressman Anna Paulina Luna say that she was completely disappointed by what happened today, and Elon Musk said this is the final straw of a cover-up, and actually said there have been 0 days since there have been additional arrests, basically mocking this idea or belief that there was some kind of arrests coming as a result of this.
Speaking of Elon Musk, over the weekend, though the FEC paperwork, which is necessary to form any kind of political party, is, let us say, fuzzy, to put it mildly, said there's a third political party that he's going to start and possibly bankroll with target lists for those in the Senate and select House races. Shelby, your sense?
Yeah, I mean, this is extremely difficult for Elon Musk or anyone to pull off. And it's
At least
also,
get the FEC paperwork down straight.
Exactly.
Come on, let's start there, kids.
There's a lot of steps that need to happen still for this to actually be legitimized. Yeah. The White House is sort of dismissing all of this right now. But I do think a question to keep in mind right now is, does Elon Musk continue to sort of probe and push Donald Trump's buttons? Because if that happens, we've already seen Donald Trump sort of threaten Elon Musk's businesses and the government work that he does with those businesses. Is that going to actually become a reality? Is Donald Trump and Doge, which of course Elon Musk spearheaded, going to start going after Elon Musk's effort? That's where the real news is. You know, I think there's a lot of skepticism that Elon Musk is going to be able to successfully launch his own political party and successfully going to be able to primary a whole host of Republicans. Because remember, he said that he was going to try to primary anyone who voted for the bill. That ended up being the vast majority of Republicans in Congress. That's a really big feat.
Daniel, let's pick up on that. He did not have nearly the influence he thought he might have, getting Republicans to vote against the bill in its waning moments in the Senate or the House. Tesla stock price, the last time I checked, was down 7% today because investors don't want him in politics. They want him focusing on Tesla and his other companies. Walk us through this.
Well, I think the important thing to remember, Major, is Elon Musk was the biggest individual donor to Donald Trump. So there is money backing anything he says, which is important to remember.
270 million plus, if I remember correctly.
Yes, an incredible amount of money. But what I saw in real time was when Elon Musk was side by side with Donald Trump, helping him with his agenda. And then I was there on Capitol Hill when he was tweeting against the one big, beautiful bill, and it didn't matter. In the end, it still passed because the base is with Donald Trump.
And no Republican who looked at those social media posts from Elon Musk was as fearful of a primary-inspired Musk candidate as they would be of a Trump-inspired primary candidate.
Exactly, Major. And it really shows where the power is. It's still with President Donald Trump. And President Donald Trump has been speaking out against what Elon Musk has been saying, calling him phony, saying that he shouldn't be, that it doesn't matter what he's saying, that he's losing it. So this could be something that carries no weight in actually power of Congress.
As you might notice, folks, it's been a slightly abbreviated session at the family table, but that's what happens some days. Shelby Tauca, Daniela Diaz, Jake Rosen, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Trump administration calls them radical, wasteful, and sometimes calls them racist. But the head of the NAACP calls the moves to cut DEI policies outrageous. We'll hear from him next, right here on The Takeout.
We don't want him on our stage because what he has done in the past, he displays the lack of discipline when he gets the microphone, and he does not respect the Constitution.
That was NAACP President Derek Johnson here on The Takeout defending his organization's choice to end its 116-year tradition of inviting the president to its national conference. I also asked him to assess the Trump administration's hostility to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs throughout the federal government. And here is his response.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, there is no operational definition of what it is from agency to agency, from state to state, from institution to institution. It is a weaponized buzz phrase, particularly when you say DEI, that has been masterfully orchestrated to distract the American people from what's really taking place. And what's taking place is a radical redefinition of the role of government. The shifting of tax policy around who gets taxed, who's not taxed, and what those tax dollars are used for, and the undermining of the regulatory scheme to hold entities accountable to ensure we have safe drinking water, safe air to breathe, and safe food to eat. And that's what is taking place. It is easy to go and otherize communities or use buzz phrase to distract. This piece of legislation was always the goal. We are in the middle of a fight that really kicked off after 1932 New Deal policies and continued through the Great Society. And that fight has always existed from the creation of John Burke Society, the intellectualizing of the conservative movement by William F. Buckley, to the George Wallace movement, ending up with those three groups coming together and creating a heritage foundation. And it was always about tax policy. The fight is still taking place, and it's a decades-long fight.
You mentioned that piece of legislation. Like I said, we talked at the top about its passage and Trump's inevitable signature. Part of that legislation is to take away a good portion of Biden-era policies, not only dealing with clean energy, but environmental justice. And for my audience, and to explain very quickly, environmental justice is designed to address or redress wrongs in communities where pollution and polluting industries made their lives disproportionately worse, and to make sure that there is some awareness in the federal government and maybe some dollars that flow to those communities to address that. All of that is being eliminated, either through this bill or through actions from the Environmental Protection Agency. Derek, the NAACP fought for this for decades, and it is now being reversed almost completely.
It's unfortunate because this is not a black issue or a white issue, male or female issue. This is about the quality of our environment, toxic dumping, polluting of water streams, making sure we have safe air to breathe. Those are issues that we should all be concerned with. And you have a lot of corporate interests who resist regulations because it costs them to ensure that the products they're putting into the stream of commerce is done so in a way that is responsible to maintaining a healthy, livable environment for human beings across communities. And absolutely we fought for that because we don't want to see toxic dumping in, poor white communities in Kentucky or native reservations or urban areas. I grew up with asthma because I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, during a time where the auto industry was as strong in that city and in that region than ever, and the air quality was poor. And it was only after the automotive industry began to clean up the emissions into the air that a person like me, I have not suffered from asthma conditions ever since. We need to embrace an environment that is healthy for all people, and that can only take place if there's government standards and regulations to ensure corporate interests are not putting profits above people's health.
One last thing before I let you go, Derek. There's lots of conversation in Washington about what is perceived to be the hollowing out of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department under the Trump administration, meaning less aggressive or even non-aggressive work in that space. There's also efforts in the Trump Justice Department to possibly bring federal charges against election officials if they are not acting in ways that the Trump Justice Department believes it ought to, or they ought to. Evaluate.
The way they believe they should operate. We have a Constitution, and we should adhere to the Constitution. That equal rights, equal protection under the law should be afforded to all citizens. We cannot go and event protective classes that have had a history of discrimination against. We should make sure that the constitutional rights apply to all citizens. And if you don't have a civil rights division that's evaluating that based on constitutional, a well-settled law, as opposed to someone's belief, that is the disrespect and the disregard of the Constitution that I spoke about earlier today. We must, as a nation, accept one or two pathways. We're going to have a democracy that's based on a constitution, or we're going to have something less than that, whether we throw the Constitution out the window. We believe, as a community, as an organization, and as an individual, that we must operate within the guardrails of our Constitution because that's true patriotism.
Derek Johnson, president of the NAACP. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
From Lincoln's stovepipe hat and facial hair to Trump's red tie and MAGA hats, a look at presidential fashion. Next. Welcome back. President Trump has made a mark on U.S. retail trends by selling his merchandise. That goes beyond campaign gear, includes sneakers, watches, and fragrances. But a U.S. president who has a foothold in fashion, well, that's not without precedent. Prior to working at the White House, Andrew Johnson, for example, was a renowned Tennessee tailor who even invented a popular variation on the Prince Albert style coat, which I will not be adding to my closet, by the way. And former President Harry Truman, known for having an unwaveringly neat appearance, owned a men's clothing store in Kansas City, Missouri, nearly 3 decades before taking office. Joining me now on the big screen in front of the family table, Summer Ann Lee, who I'm happy to say is the very first historian of presidential fashion I've had the pleasure to meet and talk to. Summer Ann Lee, it's great to have you with us. We think of President Trump, obviously, as a president, but also as a licensor and a merchandiser. Does that put him in a distinct category among presidents who've influenced American fashion?
Yes, absolutely. So what President Trump is doing is unprecedented in many ways. I'll start by saying that there is a long history of presidents' names and their likenesses being used in consumer products, including fashion. But what's notable is that historically that has been tied to campaigns, right? So a campaign that comes to mind that particularly was oversaturating the market was Eisenhower's 1952 campaign. There was so much fashion merchandise, from dresses and gloves and parasols and hosiery, that had Eisenhower's slogan, campaign slogan and likeness on them, that supporters could wear to show their enthusiasm for him as a candidate. But this is very different, because here we have a sitting president who is monetizing off of his name while in office through things like Trump sneakers, Trump watches, and Trump fragrances that he has licensed.
So there are those who think of those consumers of Trump products as doing so as an expression of political identity. Might it also be true that there is a stylistic component that we ought to take somewhat seriously?
Yeah, absolutely. So Americans have always worn their politics on their sleeves, so to speak, and also emulating the president's image can be a part of this. We see as far back as in 1863, an Englishman who was visiting the United States observed that supporters of President Abraham Lincoln would grow beards and facial hair in Lincoln's image to show their support for the president and for the Union. We also saw during, to throw it back to Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower famously wore a Homburg hat to his inaugurations rather than the traditional top hat, and Washington D.C. retailers could not keep the Homburg hat in stock or on shelves after this because of people who did want to emulate the president's image, right? So with President Trump, we do tend to see this first and foremost through people adopting, I believe, the red MAGA hat, which of course was campaign merchandise, but it was also, it's something that President Trump still continues to wear to this day. But even more than that, I think that Trump has projected for many decades now this personal branding, this personal image of luxury, wealth, right, conspicuous consumption. So I think in a lot of this merchandise, especially the collectible luxury goods like the sneakers, watches, and fragrances, supporters are able to feel like they're buying into a little bit of that image that Trump projects, that lifestyle.
Let me throw a couple of other names at you. Harry Truman, very sharp dresser. JFK, thought of as someone who influenced styles. And let's not leave out President Barack Obama and the very famous tan suit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, President Truman was, of course, a very sharp dresser, and he did co-own a men's haberdashery, or essentially a men's clothing store, in the 1920s before he was president. And he was most famous for popularizing the sports shirt, very loud, boldly patterned, casual shirts for men during the 50s. So that sort of became known as the Truman shirt. You brought up John F. Kennedy. The Kennedys, when they were in the White House, were really considered essentially American fashion plates. They were so fashionable, and President Kennedy was the first president to be featured on the cover of GQ magazine. He was also considered a promoter of the American Ivy League style, two-button suits, and of course going bareheaded. And he was so youthful and so sophisticated that he really did help forge what we consider the American look to this day. And of course, you brought up President Obama and the infamous tan suit scandal. I think that President Obama's tan suit was in fact very fashionable, but it did come under ire at the time for critics were saying that it was too informal for him to wear at the White House.
Seems quaint now. Summer Ann Lee, presidential fashion historian. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for the Takeout today. Please tune in tomorrow for a very special guest, Freddie the Beagle, a Customs and Border Protection canine, and his handler join the show to mark Freddie's return to duty after being assaulted on the job. Stick around, please. Why? Because the Daily Report coming up next, right here on CBS News 24/7.